fantasy football.
There has never been a more obvious sell.
There's a huge edge to be gained by looking into things like this.
With the hype, it's only going one way. He's still too cheap.
How can you not love fantasy football?
How can you not love fantasy football? Indeed, we have got only a few more weeks of the regular season left, but DFS, it just keeps rolling. And we've been on a really strong streak with these videos. Last week, we had 4 out of 5 plays that hit in a really usable and good way. The week before, we had 3 really strong hits and 2 which were kind of okay. So we're just going to keep it rolling. We're going to keep rolling with these. I've got 5 players we're going to rattle through. We're going to talk some DFS questions if there's any in the chat. We're going to build a lineup at the end, and we're going to get you set up to absolutely crush your opponents this week and walk away profitable, making sure that you finish this season strongly. First player, it is Bijan Robinson, who is 6,700 against the Jets. It feels like Bijan, like he's arrived, perhaps, or, finally he's kind of gotten here. Finally, Arthur Smith has just taken the shackles off, and he's just realized that if Arthur Smith's going to keep his job, he needs to get something out of one of these highly picked assets who he spent a lot of draft capital on. And Bijan Robinson, he had his first multi-touchdown performance of his career last week, scored a career-high 27.3 points. It was his first 20-point game since week 2, which absolutely is what we want to see as we get to the real money part of the season. Robinson, he averaged 5.7 yards per carry and 10.7 yards per reception. He looked exactly as advertised. This is what Rich was talking about in all the dynasty shows this year. This is what the whole draft community was talking about. Bijan Robinson is an elite player in both the receiving game and the run game. So how does the matchup look? He's playing against the Jets, and the Jets, they're a run funnel defense. They rank 4th against the passing DVOA, 17th against the run. They've allowed the 5th most fantasy points to running backs, and they've given up the 6th most receptions to the position as well. So it feels like whatever the Jets try to do to defend Bijan Robinson, they're probably going to struggle against him. The only thing stopping Bijan from having another big day would be Arthur Smith giving us another rug pull. And we're definitely not immune to that. But he seems to be aware of how hot his seat is. He seems to be aware that Bijan Robinson isn't like a normal rookie, and he can unleash him and really should be doing so down the stretch, particularly if the Falcons have got aspirations of squeezing into the playoffs. In terms of how I'm going to be using Bijan Robinson this week, I'll be playing him in cash. I think that's fine. I think that some people will possibly feel that's going to be a little too risky. If you're going to play him as a tournament play, that's fine. I think that you don't really need to force a correlation or a stack. I think that we've got nobody else in this game that really feels great. The only one I'd want to play is Breece Hall. But as you can see on screen there, the Falcons, down towards the bottom, they've allowed the 31st most fantasy points to running backs. So they're definitely not an easy matchup for Breece Hall to go nuclear against. Shout out to Nicholas in the chat. Appreciate you being here. Appreciate the kind words. We will do everything we can to get you winning. And as we move on, before we get to the next player, though, if you're here, if you're enjoying the content, if you want to win more, you want to get more content like this on your YouTube feed every week, hit that subscribe button. One button, that's all it takes to help improve your YouTube feed. Next player, it is Rachaad White, who's 6,300 against the Panthers. And week 12 was the first time this year the Bucs had a 100-yard rushing performance from an individual player, with Rachaad White creeping, literally getting that 100-yard bonus on the last couple of plays of the game. And it was only the second time in the last 2 years that the Bucs have had a 100-yard rushing game from one of their backs. Typically with Rachaad White, we see him getting there through the receiving game. But for the Colts, he was running for a career-high 6.7 yards per carry. Again, that's the best that any Bucs running back has had over the last couple of years when we've had 10 or more touches in a game. He hit his second highest amount of rushing yards in 2 years as well. He had 105 at one point last year. But aside from that, he's never crept into that category. And if we see Rachaad White start to add this to his game, if he can be productive, even just against teams who are bad against the run, if he can start giving us 100-yard games there, as well as being an elite pass-catching back, which he's probably on the boundary of. Elite might be a little bit much. But he could really be an absolute difference maker for fantasy teams. In terms of a matchup, the Panthers, they rank 32nd in run defense DVOA. They've given up the 3rd most running back rushing points to running backs. along with a league high 1.5 touchdowns per game. No other team in the league gives up more than 1.1 rushing touchdowns to running backs per game. So you can pretty much just book a touchdown at least. And for me, that makes White playable in all formats, whether you're looking at cash game, double up multipliers, or whether you're looking at tournaments only. But yeah, in tournaments, if you're looking for any kind of correlation, I guess you could go with Adam Thielen, but last week he kind of came down to earth a little bit, so I don't feel the need to force it. One game where we can definitely be looking for correlations is the Miami at Washington game. Highest over-under of the week at 50.0. It's been a few weeks since we've had an over-under this high. And Tyreek is 9,600 on DraftKings, which is definitely on the expensive end. But when you sort of break this game down, this is an absolute cupcake of a matchup for the Dolphins passing attack. The Commanders, they're dead last in passing defense, DVOA. They'll have the second most fantasy points for wide receiver. And Tyreek Hill, he's been a wide receiver, the wide receiver 4 or better in 6 of the last 7 games. So it becomes quite difficult to work out what the Commanders could do to stop Tyreek because they just simply lack quality pieces in their secondary. And in terms of what the Commanders will do to help this along, they play at a very fast pace. And when teams play at a fast pace, it helps create more points. It's something we always want to be looking for. Let's go over to the matchup slide. If you're liking these matchup slides, this is all the kind of stuff that is going into our Discord for our YouTube members every week. They get a full DFS deep dive write-up from myself. They get an exclusive members-only video. They get matchup data like this that they can use to go out and crush their opponents. Hit the join button below. It's less than $2 a week, and it'll absolutely pay for itself. Back to Tyreek Hill, though. The Commanders, they rank 30th against wide receiver 1s in DVOA. They've allowed 12 different wide receivers to score 17 or more points against them, including CeeDee Lamb, Brandon Cooks, Darius Slayton, and Tyler Lockett since week 10 alone. That's 4 players since week 10 who've gone over 17 points. And those are regular PPR points, not accounting for the bonuses on DraftKings. So Tyreek is absolutely playable in all formats this week. I think with savings on Zach Moss and some of the budget wide receivers below 4K that I've talked about in our Discord, it's absolutely possible that you can play Tyreek Hill anywhere you want to. I would imagine it would be quite common for people to pair him with Zach Moss because Zach Moss is only 4,600. In tournaments, I want to lean into 2 double stacks this week, playing Tyreek, Waddle, or one of the running backs. And then on the other side, looking at a couple of Commanders players, Curtis Samuel and Logan Thomas, who have more positive matchups than the wide receivers Jahan Dotson and Terry McLaurin do. Let's move on to our next player. We've got Brandon Aiyuk, 7,200 against the Eagles. I mean, for me, it's death taxes and just targeting this Eagles secondary week after week. There is no team in the league allowing as many points to wide receivers as the Eagles are. They rank 21st in pass defense DVOA. They've allowed 12 different wide receivers to score 70 or more PPR points. Last week, you go back, both Stephon Diggs and Gabe Davis went over that amount against them. They really struggle in the passing game. This isn't the Eagles defense that we saw last year, and it's been tricky for them. Jerry in the chat saying he likes Waddle this week. Absolutely. We'll get to the end and we'll see what it looks like to build a 2 double stack around that game, maybe onslaught it a bit. Back to Aiyuk, though. Here's the matchup data for this game. Aiyuk's value in real football terms has probably been greater than it has in fantasy this year. He's only had 3 top 20 finishes, 1 since week 4. Last week against the Seahawks, it always felt like a Deebo Samuel game because the Seahawks play so much zone. And in zone, the looks just tend to go to Deebo Samuel so much more often. But this week sets up really well for him against the Eagles. I'm feeling very much like you can look at playing both Aiyuk and Deebo in a team. Deebo's 6,200, Aiyuk is 7,200, so it doesn't feel too prohibitive. The Eagles are good against running backs. The Eagles are better against tight ends than they are against wide receivers. So it just feels natural that I want to side with both wide receivers here. Well, one more player we're going to get to, and then we're going to take a look at some lineup stuff. And it is in the Denver-Houston game. This is going to be a popular game this week, 46.5 over-under. these slides, these are taken from our weekly preview show. If you like this kind of stuff, check out the full preview link below. Loads of good data in there. A lot of Rich's dynasty thoughts as well as general matchup stuff. Courtland Sutton, 5,400 though. He failed to score a touchdown for the first time in 6 games last week against the Browns, but we knew it was going to be a tough matchup. Like, there are just about no matchups that are as tough for wide receivers as playing the Browns. And Courtland Sutton, he did pretty well. He had a free catch, 61-yard day against them. And we kind of have to just give him a bit of a pass because it was only the 3rd time this year he'd failed to get in the end zone. I think that you can kind of look at this game, and if it goes the way we're hoping, we're projecting plenty of points for it. We're projecting it to be a fun one for fantasy. Then there are definitely avenues for Courtland Sutton to have another big day. And at 5,400, it's a very easy click. The Texans, their defense ranks 26th in passing DVOA. They rank 24th against wide receiver ones. So they've struggled with this all year. And what we've seen from Courtland Sutton in the red zone in particular is that he just has a connection with Russ, and it's really working right now. And I'd be surprised if we didn't see that continue to work. At 5,400, I'll play Courtland Sutton in both multipliers, double ups, as well as tournaments. I think, if you're looking for stacks in this game, Russell Wilson is going to be fairly popular this week, possibly more popular than CJ Stroud, because CJ Stroud is up over 8K now. I think when you look at the other side of things in the Texans side, it's a little bit more tricky to project. Okay, well, are we looking at Nico Collins? Is he going to have a big week, or is this going to be another Tank Dell week? I like putting Russ stacks out there with Courtland Sutton and then Dalton Schultz. If Dalton Schultz is healthy enough to play this week, he's a fantastic matchup. The Broncos have sucked against tight ends all year. As you can see down at the bottom there, they've allowed the most points to tight end this year. So definitely a position we can be looking to target. So let's go over to build a quick lineup and see what kind of comes out nicely this week. I've kind of talked a little bit about some of the stuff I want to be doing, but using the solver, which is synced with established runs, ownership projections, which I like to use, go over to $12 fair catch to simulate against this one, which is a single entry tournament. So we've got Tua. Let's see. I think we can go Tua, Tyreek, and Waddle. Throw in Curtis Samuel, who has a nice matchup. The Dolphins allow the 8th most fantasy points to slot receivers. We've also struggled against tight ends all year. And if I get an opportunity to correlate the tight end position with a stack, then that's what I'm after. Too often it works well setting up like that. So let's go down. We'll choose the Patriots defense just as a placeholder for now and see where we land. Running back, Zach Moss is going to be very chalky, but maybe we can still squeeze him in and it won't look too bad. You can see kind of over here, 123% ownership we're up to already, which feels a little chalky. But let's see. We've got 10K left. What else can we get to running back-wise that might open this up? Najee Harris down at 8% a week after going crazy. I'm not a Najee Harris fan typically, but I think if people are going to go back to Jaylen Warren, you can see his ownership there at sort of 16%, then I don't mind going with it. And then we've got 5K left. Let's take a look at that one. It's not looking great down here. Obviously, we've got Zach Moss locked in already. If you're in the chat and there's anybody that you like the look of that we could fit in, let me know. Deontay Johnson. Let's go with Deontay Johnson for a bounce back. So that'll simulate it. You can see it's decent sim return on investment at 30%, cash rate at 30%, pretty much. The only problem here is the product ownership at 147%. So I think if you're looking at lineups where you want to play Tyreek Hill and you want to play Zach Moss, you can see that's kind of 85% of your lineup accounted for. And I don't think that we necessarily need to be completely afraid of it, because if Pachok hits in a way which we expect for Zach Moss and a way that we expect for Tyreek Hill, we are going to see some teams come in with total ownership much higher than usual. Normally, it's in the range of like 105 to 125%. So 147% would be a big outlier to that. But what we're seeing on Zach Moss is just, it's a free square week. The ownership is going to be so high because he's priced down so low, and we know what we're getting with him. We know that he can absolutely smash. When he played the Titans earlier this year, he had, I think it was 195 total yards, the third most yards total by any player all season. And he just absolutely smashed them. That was in week 5. So I'll be a bit looser on my ownership constraints this week. I think that if I am playing a chalky lineup like this with Tyreek and Zach Moss, what I want is some of the stuff I've built here. So we have 3, 4, 5 players under 10% rostered. We also have Curtis Samuel and Logan Thomas, both around that kind of 10% range. So I think if you're looking at those, that's a way which your stat can get different. So I definitely do like that one. So I'm just going to park that quickly. And then I will get to those questions in the chat. Onslaught. Any interest in Taysom Hill? Yeah, so me and Rich talked about it a bit on the Week 13 preview show. So I think that when you look at what the Saints have at wide receiver this week, it is truly a very bad situation. I think we're at a point where A.T. Perry is going to be quite chalky because he's 3,300. The wide receiver room is left with, let me see, I had it right in front of my face a moment ago. So this is the wide receiver room for the Saints. Outside of A.T. Perry, they have Keith Kirkwood, Marquez Callaway, Lynn Bowden Jr., and John Trey Kirkland. So I don't know a vast majority. John Trey Kirkland was not somebody whose name I was familiar with before. The rest of the names are people who haven't done a whole lot. So it feels like it's definitely setting up for an Alvin Kamara week. You know, he's going to see probably more receiving volume than we've seen for a few weeks. And then Taysom Hill, definitely. You look at the Saints, the Lions allow their 13th most fantasy points to the tight end position. If you want to call Taysom Hill a running back, that's somewhere where the Lions have been good at times, but they've also allowed sort of big days to Gus Edwards and Austin Eckler, both having 20-point games against them in recent weeks. If you want to call Taysom Hill a quarterback, the Lions have allowed the 6th most fantasy points to quarterbacks this year. So, yeah, I think you can definitely look at Taysom Hill this week. In terms of his price this week, I believe DraftKings obviously put him in as tight end, 5,200. So it's not like we're sneaking it by anyone. But you see that ownership over here on the right, 1%, which definitely makes him kind of interesting. I think, you know, we've seen a bit of wheels falling off with Derek Carr at times this year. So do they end up putting Taysom Hill in some situations to kind of try and alleviate some pressure from him? I didn't expect his ownership to be quite that low. So, yeah, definitely somebody I don't mind playing. But if we look at it against the other tight ends, so Taysom Hill is the 3rd most expensive tight end, 300 more than Trey McBride. If Taysom Hill hits in a meaningful way at 5,200, it's going to be huge leverage against Trey McBride if Trey McBride's kept in check. And then the other chalk running backs, he's talking about David Njoku at like 17%. So we can definitely find ways to get different there. Nicholas in the chat saying at the beginning of the week, the pickings value-wise was slim. Now with Moss cards, wide receivers, New Orleans wide receivers, definitely some interesting spots. Yeah, in the DFS column, which goes into our Discord, let me pull up what I had. I think I had 4 players below 4K in there altogether. I think you could definitely look at A.T. Perry. We've seen a little bit from him. Curtis Samuel at 4,100, I've always talked about. Jalen Guyton at 3,300. Like, we've seen enough from Quentin Johnson now to know that it's probably not going to click for him anytime soon. I think that you can look at what Jalen Guyton's been doing. He's played 79% of the snaps in week 10, 80% in week 12, 11 targets over those 2 games. The Patriots, they ranked 23rd in DVOA against wide receiver 2s. So it's an area which the Chargers could have success with. I think I feel more confident in Keenan Allen, Jalen Guyton, Gerald Everett than I do in the run game this week. And then the other player under 4K who's interesting is Elijah Moore, 3,500. Joe Flacco at quarterback, but like those two have a relationship. And over Elijah Moore's career, he's played, I think it's about 7 games with Joe Flacco, and he averaged 11.83 PPR points in those games compared to 7.7 across his career without Flacco. We know that Flacco wants to check down. I'm not sure I can quite bring myself to run full Joe Flacco stacks, but I mean, let's build another lineup quickly and see what it looks like with Joe Flacco, because he is very cheap at 4,600, being projected sort of like around about 5% ownership. Let's chuck Elijah Moore in there and David Njoku. And let's see what else we can do then. So we've got those 2 in. Again, I'll just check the Patriots defense in. I quite like the Patriots defense this week just because the Chargers, we saw it last week, we just fumbled the ball constantly, turned it over. They're a team that feels like we've always got a couple of mistakes in them. So I like Brandon Aiyuk this week. We talked about him in the video. To correlate him with a bit of Devonta Smith. Running back, we'll go try and get away from the Zach Moss pick, perhaps. And let's go with Bijan and Rachaad White, giving us 7,900 left over for the flex. And then let's go Mike Evans, who had a monster game against the Panthers last year to end the season. Sim this one out again. So not simming quite as well as the other team, but I don't hate it. I mean, you can see the sim return on investment up there at almost about break even, sim cash rate at 17%. Look, I mean, Joe Flacco is always going to struggle to sim well compared to some of the other quarterbacks on it. But a ceiling of around 243 points. To win tournaments, you need to be looking at getting a ceiling above 200 points. And here we've got plenty of differential players. Let's take Rachaad White out and put Moss in, and then see what we could do if we wanted to eat a little bit more chalk. We'll take Mike Evans out, and now we have 9,600, Tyreek Hill, up to 139% total ownership. But boom. I mean, 74% return on investment. It's very rare we see lineups like that. So that's definitely intriguing. As Nicholas says, get up to Tyreek, and I mean, the results are there. Like, that's pretty impressive. I think that's one which, hey, we'll chuck it in the tournament. We'll see how it does. Devonta Smith, 2.4% owned. He's been balling. We've seen how much Dallas Goedert, when he's not in the lineup, it seems to make an impact for Devonta Smith. Brandon Aiyuk under 10%, Bijan under 10%, Flacco 5%. Yeah, I mean, this is the kind of lineup. It's ugly, but it could do some damage. Let's. I'll throw that one into the saved lineup, and yeah. So that's going to do it pretty much. I think we kind of covered a lot of ground there. Appreciate everybody who's been here. We have more videos coming through the weekend. You want the match by match previews? They're in the description. You can go over to the playlist. Each game, 3 to 5 minutes long, all the details you need. If you're a YouTube member, tomorrow we'll have the DFS clinic video where we talk the stacks that I like. We're going to talk about the cash game core that I like. We're going to talk about ways to leverage away from Zach Moss this weekend. Appreciate you all being here in the chat. Nicholas, appreciate you. Jerry, everybody have a good weekend. Let's get into the green and win some money.